So we are live now.
Okay. Uh, Welcome to the third day session of breaking it down. So we have tried to rant yesterday, uh, even though we did not really end up ranting too much. We did discuss about rant. Today I thought we will build a little bit on what has just been discussed in the session yesterday, and also to take into other forms that we perhaps may discuss in line of ranting. So the first question for today is, can heckling activate a conversation?
I think when I think of heckling, then it sort of suggests there's an automatic interaction, right, between the person who's speaking and the person who's doing the calling out, if you like. So there is sort of implication of interaction between the speaker or the listener, or sort of, right?
Yes.
But
And
Yes.
but their interaction might not be cohesive, right? So the the speaker and the listener might actually have a very an interaction full of friction. They might actually be contesting each other.
Yeah. But
But do you think then, do you see heckling as a potential to activate a conversation, or do you think it as something more symbolic actually?
It shuts down the conversation on the other hand.
Sorry?
Yeah, because it
I,
takes very sporty hecklers to actually take heckling not as a position, but
yeah.
as a kind of sport. And that it's actually about sportiness, because I
Yeah.
can I can feel very disturbed about somebody raising an objection of some kind to a something which I consider to be a very basic thing.
So the
But
sportiness has to be coming from both the speaker as well as the heckler.
Yeah.
yeah, and the
yeah.
sportiness has to kind of embody a kind of spirit which is like, हाँ बहुत सारे perspectives हैं, even if my perspective is this, I can't expect this from anyone.
I
But do
mean,
you
I think
think that sporty is the way to think about it? I'm not very sure, Fayaz. But however, sorry, Satya was saying something.
I think what it suggests is, like when you look at, like, I don't know, politics or something, and then you see parliament or people who are going back and forth. There is a certain sport in that as well, right? Who can get the who's cleverer, who's able to use humor, and maybe, of course, it's cutting as well. But there is that, maybe, I mean, not, yeah, I think sport is not a
Yeah,
bad.
and the essence of sportiness is that uh, the game is more important than winning, and that essence in a discussion, that keeping the discussion healthy and alive rather than trying to win the discussion. I think sporty
And maybe,
is an appropriate word for using there.
Okay, sorry,
and I
Rana, you were
think,
saying something?
yeah, just to connect it to what we've been feeling, that this is something to do with sportiness, and I think we do get this feeling precisely because heckling occurs during the conversation, or it happens within the conversational sphere rather than as something that it starts a conversation. I mean, it's there's this kind of reactionary position to begin with that enables heckling to begin with. So I don't think it's for instance similar with rant, that it can occur at its own space and its own time, but heckling actually is already occurring during the conversation. So that kind of lifeline of heckling appears or is present during the conversation rather than away from conversation. I don't know.
I see heckling as being based on intrusion. So it actually even the playfulness of heckling is mostly based on intrusion. So you don't let the other person really finish what they are trying to say, or you keep intruding and butting in and trying to, and that is what ends up heckling the person who's speaking.
yeah, also it ends up becoming very much about power, right? So if the two parties are not
Yeah.
equal, if you like, then I think, I mean, I'm just thinking if we turn it around and not look at it in the abstract sense of, heckling as a political maneuver, but for myself, for instance, if you're presenting or something, you kind of almost want to make sure that you are you're anti-heckle proof. You know what I mean? Like you want to make
Right.
sure that you have all the answers already, so
Yeah.
that there is no one who can come in and start. You know what I mean? Like you're sort of making sure you're protecting yourself. I mean, that's also because heckling is not pleasant, certainly.
And there is also the artfulness of the speaker, of how they handle a heckler. If you're able to take it in your stride, and if you're able to, make it funny or somehow engage the heckler, you might actually have something constructive there.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting small I think 4-minute video of Obama handling hecklers and Donald Trump handling hecklers. It's
Hmm.
quite fascinating. It's like he says, yes, Obama says that, I understand why you disagree with me. We can talk about it, etc., etc. Whereas Donald Trump says, oh, please get those people out of the
Hmm.
out of the crowd, etc. It's a very no, that's when you said about the speaker's ability to deal with heckling in terms of
Right,
how
right.
one takes heckling and gets back.
Right, and to connect to that, to what Rohini just said about power, in the case of Trump, it is about establishing who's powerful. But in the case of Obama, it's about power sharing. You're sharing your stage.
Yeah, it's more in a way. At least the projection is more inclusive, even the
Yeah, at least the
reality of what.
projection is, yes, exactly. Yep.
But I suppose, at one level, if you look at this level, if we're talking Obama, Trump, that kind of political sort of stage, then I suppose the thing is that heckling then, because it's also so disruptive, does maybe offer a possibility of where you can, sort of push things in a different direction and disrupt, sort of bring in, embarrassment, interruption, failure, discomfort, which might otherwise never enter that in.
Definitely, yeah, yeah, so true. And I'm reminded of one of those universities in UK where these female activists, they went up on stage during a conservative Muslim seminar, and then these women are radical feminists, and then they go topless, and that's how they disrupt meetings to make a feminist statement. So yeah.
Hmm. So that's the point also then to think, yes, heckling is understood as a disruptive kind of act. But at the
It
same
could
time,
be.
when we say heckling is activating a conversation, the point is whether the conversation is followed after the disruption has happened, or whether heckling itself is a part of conversation. That's I would say, one of the questions that we can think about.
Interesting, because that would be a symbolic, instead of using words, you're using symbols to communicate, right? So it's still a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and just to connect it with symbol, another interesting thing about the capacity to do heckling is, the position of having a charm. Like, I think this is something that's rarely talked about. This capacity of being charming and being able
Hmm.
to inaugurate this form of heckling, because not all individuals have this actually access to heckle just because of this certain appearance or this certain voice or certain performance of their speech, for instance. So I think, like, for instance, with Obama and Trump, they're both operating on whatever level of charm or whatever form of charm they do have. And I think that's also interesting that this form of heckling is also communicates a level of charm, or like charm as something like is
Yeah.
a communicative agency.
Yeah, that's so true. The appearance of the speaker as well makes a difference to the communication and their demeanor, perhaps.
Exactly.
That's why George Bush gets his show. That's what he's saying.
The other thing I find is that uh, unlike a rant, I think
Yeah.
heckling has more space uh, it leaves more space for response in the conversation.
Hmm.
I see it as something that is that has a shorter timing or duration, and a rant can be much longer, and it's more about a singular voice saying something.
It's not a monologue in that way. It's the heckling is not a monologue.
And
It's directed
there's
towards
a goal.
Sorry.
Right, exactly. There's a goal to invoke a response.
Yeah.
Only thing is, I find like there's something very makes me uncomfortable about heckling versus a rant. At least, heckling suggests that you're really trying to, pull someone down, and I mean, only because then it becomes very much about who is able, if you have the kind of personality or the strength, or just the kind of personality ready to be able to withstand that or deal with it, and if you don't, then it can be very, it can be horrifying. Whereas a rant at least has that kind of it's not so it is explosive, but in a different way. It's sort of, it's
No, but a heckler is not necessarily trying to pull someone down. A heckler might be just trying to make their own perspective register.
No, but heckling is always targeted. There's a very clear target in heckling.
Yeah, I understand heckling, because then you could call it many other things. You wouldn't call it heckling. Heckling has a very clear sort of, you're trying to...
that clear thing which it brings up is, to me, it's not that it's, I mean, I'm just direct, it depends on where you see the energy is being directed. Are the energies being directed towards bringing someone down, or are they being directed towards putting someone up in the first place? So is it about presenting one's perspective, or is it about dismissing someone else's perspective?
But then you wouldn't heckle if you were trying to present your perspective, would you? Would you say that would be a
I mean,
heckle?
if it is,
I think you would heckle.
A repressive environment, or if it's such a dismissive environment where your perspective is not being acknowledged at all, I would imagine that, yeah, you would heckle.
Yeah, because for example, in the case of the female activists, they would never have a space in that stage. They would never be invited to such a. So that's the only way.
I can imagine numerous sessions at the India Art Fair where I might be pushed to heckle.
Yeah, certainly. Prayas, this time we should definitely do it. Plant 4 people in the audience to heckle.
Yeah.
And I think heckling has this kind of radial movement. I mean, meaning to say, on one hand, yes, there are certain occasions where it's targeted, but most of the time, I think, or I feel that heckling actually has this kind of radiality in which it stands at this kind of assumed or presumed center of conversation, and then try to radiate this kind of, maybe it's aggression, or maybe this kind of I don't know if it makes sense.
I was wondering what begins to happen if the heckling is staged, and if the heckler and the heckled know. How does that change things? How does it change how the act of heckling is viewed?
But then the audience will be surprised, na? That audience don't know it's staged.
Because there is a tradition of having shills, right? There's a tradition of having shills who do encouragement. So they are planted there very consciously by the speaker.
Or even hecklers are planted. I mean, heckling can also be orchestrated to literally, test somebody's defenses or to unnerve somebody, especially if it's like political parties and oppositions.
Yeah, but as long as there is a certain establishment that is shaken up, as long as there is some amount of moving and shaking happening, there is heckling happening. So it doesn't matter if it started off as being staged.
I mean, it could matter in the sense, because if you're trying to create a certain narrative, it's like, Shiv Sena activists or whoever coming and deliberately attacking their own, what happened in the Hyderabad University thing, where people came and incited. So they are the enemy, but they pretend to be the friend.
Yeah.
Even at JNU that happened, right?
Exactly. I think it was JNU or Hyderabad, I forgot. But
No,
JNU.
People... JNU. Okay. Hyderabad is a little different. And JNU,
no, I mean, there was a riot. There was a campus riot happening, and then it was being incited by people pretending to be the students.
Yeah.
So that's what I was talking about.
Shaunak?
On a tangent, this reminds me of so in the Bolshoi ballet, actually in most old Russian theaters, the theater hires clappers, and
Yeah.
these clappers form a clique, and of course their role is to clap at the right time so that the audience knows when to clap. But if
Right.
they, as a dancer or an artist, if they decide they hate you for some reason, they also begin to clap at the wrong time. And like to me, that's actually a very organized form of heckling, because
Right.
that can change a lot. They're basically drowning you out at the wrong time.
It's
So
like
Yeah,
the
because
American
even if you
television.
paid them, it's not working because they're doing
yeah.
the wrong thing.
It's like the American television laughing for you or
Yes,
telling
the
you when to
applause
laugh.
track.
Exactly. Okay, we are going to. We'll soon have to move to the next question. Shaunak, can heckling activate a conversation?
Sorry, I just came in, so I don't know the previous things that were discussed. But there are two quick things that I actually find quite funny is that there is a thing called the International Hecklers Competition, which is
Oh,
basically because heckling is just such a like a enduring and a dominant part of American stand-up comedy that I'll try and find the link right now and send it on the group. It's actually quite an amazing sort of this thing where stand-up comedians are invited and are
Mm-hmm.
told that they're going to be heckled, but they will not be the people who are either appreciated or evaluated. It'll be the hecklers who would be evaluated, right?
Whoa.
I'm very
Okay.
confident in the framing of the questions that the heckling is evaluated and so on. I'll try and send a link of it, but it's actually really interesting because it's a sort of model wherein almost administered into the delivery of a certain food or a certain content is the sort of anticipation of a kind of contagion of things that are meant to disrupt it. I can
Hmm.
understand that that's probably not how a genuine heckle is, because it works with the notion of the impulsive, of the completely spontaneous and the impromptu. But it's interesting to see how these groups of people who refer to themselves as professional hecklers plan, consolidate each other, and then it's like a mass consolidated sort of an onslaught, which I think
That's
is.
like institutionalized heckling almost.
I mean, yeah, it's planned.
Yeah.
Even if it's not institutionalized, but it's definitely pre-planned and entirely anticipated.
Mm. Okay. Any more additions before we move to the next question?
No, I think we can go.
Okay. Okay. The second question is: would you process disagreement through an open letter?
No,
No,
no.
No.
Okay. There's so many no's. You also
I
have to
mean,
say why. You can't just say no.
but I just feel like, for one thing, I mean, given that, the way we're in this world of sort of social media, I
Uh-huh.
think every Facebook post is like an open letter, right? Anything you post on a friend's wall is general yarn for everybody else. And
Hmm.
every time, I mean, I just feel like the open letter becomes this kind of, it's a public announcement, it's posing as a private gesture, and I don't really, for me at least, I mean, I suppose the only thing is that it's fun to read somebody else's mail, you know what I mean? That's the only thing that Facebook could be to its advantage, but I don't know. It's slippery. I think it's really what it seems to be, which I find a bit discomforting.
yeah, I actually tend to agree. So my gag reflex to most open letters is usually of revulsion. So I must immediately point out I'm
Breaking up, can't hear.
You're cracking up, Shanak.
oh sorry, did you hear what I said until now?
So,
It's still
It's
it's still
still
cracking. Mumbled.
Okay, is it better now?
not really.
Is it better now?
no.
It's not so much to do with the volume, but maybe your bandwidth or something.
you could reduce your call into an audio call at the top from the controls.
Okay. Am I audible now?
You're sort of breaking up. It's very distorted. That's the only thing.
Okay. You guys continue. I'm going to try and speak through an audio.
Okay.
Okay.
You sound like a droid actually.
Yeah.
Are you a droid? Shanak, are you actually a droid?
Yeah, I do sound like that in real life. but I'm going to try and make this into an audio, so you guys should continue talking.
Okay.
Okay, other perspectives. There are many no's that they said why they don't want to process disagreements to open letter. So before Sean, sorry.
I actually think of disagreements as very personal things. So somehow, maybe I'm thinking of them at a different scale. So I'd rather, yeah, disagree with a person privately than do it on. And I mean, if it was open, then it would become a rant, I guess. Or that's what I would call it.
Okay,
You know,
so
but sometimes there is a way to disagree through. I mean, I would think there would be situations where you could express yourself in an open letter in a very public manner to express disagreement without it being terribly negative or attacking or anything, you know. Because there are times, you know how you have these letter exchanges between thinkers, for example, in historical letter exchanges, where the whole processing is happening during the writing process. You're writing and processing your thoughts.
Yeah.
And then you, at least for me, when I write it down, my emotion comes out, but then I'm able to temper it.
But then you
And
could send
then,
them a letter, right? Why would you? I mean, the open letter
but
becomes.
yeah, no, but what I'm saying is if I want the world to know about it, because if there is a situation where, for example, if there's a character assassination kind of stuff going on, or I'm suspecting somebody of, trying to change a narrative that I'm, something else that I'm not, then maybe that's one way to process it out in the open.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Much
much
better.
better.
So basically, what I was saying then was that generally my sort of gag reflex to any kind of open letter is usually of revulsion. As a medium, it's never really worked for me. But I must also point out that I always really have loved the letter form. I love reading letters, like the famous historical letters that people have written to each other, and it becomes. Or I also otherwise love writing long emails to friends or personal relationships and so on. But the thing that I love the most in it is that it really holds. I mean, the personal letter really holds intact the sovereignty of the person writing and the person receiving, because you only have in mind me as a person, as a certain version of myself that I know the other person will receive, and the other. The minute what we go into the open letter format is that gets dispersed ad infinitum into a strange thing which I just don't understand in terms of both the person writing it, like the subject position that person is inhabiting, and the person, like to whoever one is writing, dear Arvind Kejriwal. I mean, that you're not writing from, like, you inhabit the position of the citizen or that kind of generalization. I really, really, it should
No,
never.
but it does serve a purpose, because it's the online space is all about narratives. There are battles of narratives going on, and open letters serve that way to tell a particular story, to sell a story, and then this side is saying this story, this other side is saying. I can understand being jaded with the form. Yeah, it's become a bit too much, and everybody writes open letters, and it's become old. But in a way, it's a way of creating history on your own terms, right? Like it's all documented online.
Yeah, I understand. No, I meant it more in a sort of personal relationship to letters and by the open letters as well. But also, I do agree with Rohini when she said that it's almost like all our forms of communication, because so much of social media works on the logic of publishing oneself into the trying to make a dent into the world outside through publishing oneself, right? So I don't see the as a form, both its novelty and therefore the kind of indenture it can cause, I think, is much less increasingly by the day.
So you're
It's
saying,
a sorry, go ahead.
so you're saying that you would prefer the form of the letter than to open letter. That's what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that what the open letter hope or aspires to achieve, I think a lot of other forms are anyway like moving towards that. I don't think the open letter distinctively as a form or as a subgenre holds unto itself any great value. I really enjoy letters in general, but an open letter in itself doesn't, for me, hold too much. I don't think it does much.
No, but people who write an open letter, for example, it's almost like showing who they are. What are they thinking in a large, this is who I am, this is what I'm, look at me, I'm writing an open letter. So it's almost like a self-advertisement in some ways, at least on how, on
I mean,
social
but
media.
I don't agree that on each social media post on a is like an open letter, because the mathematics of which post is visible to whom determines that actually we are not visible to a very vast audience, and open letters are traditionally read in newspapers or something like that, which are giving the letter a prefabricated public stage.
No, but aren't newspapers nowadays trawling for their material from social media? Like initially, open letter appears on Facebook and then or something, and then the newspapers
Goes to
start
the
picking it
newspaper,
up.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
with
if it makes
But that works for individuals who have a large number of followers, but
that's true. Yeah,
not for individuals who just have their individual networks.
that's true. And even if they make it public, it doesn't matter. Somebody, it has to
Yeah,
go viral only. Then will it? Yeah,
yeah. So maybe a couple of thousand followers would do it.
yeah.
I do feel that the open letter, when it's actually the content that goes into an open letter is very different than what can put. I think a personal letter, when it's not open, can be far more um, kind of precise, and it can have a greater impact from the reader, provided the reader knows you. If that personal component of knowing who's writing and knowing who's going to receive it is not there, then I think the open letter does serve, it does become an easier middle ground to express oneself.
But I'm just wondering if this middle ground more often than not flattens out all possibility of nuance, or because so much of
It's
the open letter
I
form.
agree that there's a lot that you cannot say in an open letter as compared to what you could say.
No, I also mean this in the not just in comparison to a personal letter, but also in the
Hmm,
fact that so much of the open letter format is couched in the vocabulary of a letter to so and so from an Indian soldier, a letter to so and so from an
hmm,
aggrieved
hmm,
father.
hmm, hmm,
That
hmm.
it is a certain version of ourselves that becomes the chief sort of mouthpiece for that letter. And I mean, it
Right.
seems to me a flattening out and a narrowing off. I mean, when I'm writing something to a close friend or to anybody, I mean, there are
Hmm,
various versions of myself that I'm then at that point triggering and channelizing, right? It's
hmm.
the open letter immediately like sort of like makes that myopic, like flattens it
But
out.
I think that is the idea. The idea is to create a narrative. When you write an open letter to the public in a social forum, that is you're trying to create an image, a narrative.
But I
So that
suppose
is
it's
the
also
idea.
a question of scale, right? Like who, at what scale are we talking? When we say process disagreement through an open letter, what level of the disagreement are we talking with someone whom you could actually have a conversation with? Because in that case, an open letter seems passive aggressive. And if it's a much higher level, you know what I mean? Like if it's something
Yeah.
it's a political thing, or it's something that you feel like you cannot access, where you're a very small player, then yeah, I suppose an open letter is one way at least that you can enter a conversation that maybe you wouldn't have access
access
to
to.
otherwise.
And you could also start a conversation with it because a lot of nowadays, letters on social justice, for example, there are so many people who write that. It's just having that whole discussion thing that's the comments after that and everybody's, responding to it and,
Yeah.
somebody railing against patriarchy and all these MRA types representing the patriarchy are
Yep.
attacking it or something, right? So,
So I was just then thinking that so if we were to think about just to pedal back and think if for example people have not they're writing open letters instead of reviews, like if I write an open letter to a artist friend instead of reviewing about an exhibition that I saw. So do you think in that context also it is some form that as an artist someone would not like because uh,
yeah.
No, I
Yeah,
No,
think
because it
like
does it
Rukmini
does
was saying,
sound passive
actually,
aggressive.
no, that
I would
sounds good to me. That sounds
yeah,
great.
like
okay.
actually, like Rohini was saying, I think open letter should be banned if they have been written to
What?
anyone except the Prime Minister. I mean, अगर उससे
we
कोई भी
can
नीचा
troll.
है तो यार उसके घर पे चले जाओ, चाय पी लो, फोन कर लो.
नहीं पर हम
No,
पेट्रियार्की के घर कैसे जाएं?
I mean,
No, but Aditya, I have a question then. What does an open letter allow you as a curator, critic, whatever, writing about an artist friend's work that a review does not?
No, but the point is that the idea of open letter is also as an idea of inviting response, and it's a choice for you to respond or not respond. But the point is that a review is sometimes most of the time like single directional.
Yeah, that's
Like
interesting. Yeah, I think that's. I
yeah,
think that's.
I come and then I see the exhibition and I write a review. And somewhere by the virtue of the history of how reviews are, we have some kind of a kind of a particular kind of judgment about it, where I'm not necessarily talking to you as a person, but I'm presuming exhibition as a condition or exhibition as a scenography that you have set up, which you're also, of course, part of, but you don't become the point of addressal always. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and also it's interesting because then it sort of it plays a little bit also, or it opens up this idea of also, not established sort of modes of the way these things are done. So if you are writing a review, there's sort of understood that you're not going to piss off the person too much. You might couch the language a little bit nicely. But if it's
Absolutely.
an
So
open,
yes, sorry, you were saying?
no, that just to say that I think it offers possibilities that maybe just a review definitely doesn't, because
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. If I watched a performance of a friend and I come back and I want to write something about it that is not a review, and I would like to at the same time have some kind of intensity of engagement with it.
yeah.
So then I would perhaps write an open letter to my friend, which is talking about how the performance has transformed me. Of course, I don't think passive aggressive is the thing, because at least personally for me, I would only make an effort to write something if it moves me.
Yeah.
So if it's
No, but
passive aggressive,
that's what
either
I'm
I'll
saying.
rant
But
about
then,
it.
because there's a certain scale to this, right? This is someone whom it is. That's what I'm trying to say. I think here it functions a little bit differently because it's not an abstract.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The conversation is not between two abstract entities. There's some kind of a scalable relational thing.
No, but if you wrote an open letter as in lieu of a review, would you mention that this was the performance that you went to?
Not necessarily.
Okay, yeah, because that's what I felt where the passive aggressive element comes. If it is being written about somebody specific and it's not being directly addressed to them, in terms of sending it personally, but or like a review. But if it's written like an open letter, it just seems like, okay, why didn't you just talk to me one on one?
But the point is that that's what I'm trying to say, that one also the way, especially in the context of review, I brought it up because this is some practice that I'm personally doing at the moment. I'm actually writing about Mandeep's performance as a letter to him, and the potential of him responding. The one of the other thing is also the responsiveness angle of it, which is like, if he thinks that there is something that he would like to respond to, even though he's not obliged to, then what it becomes is that it's a two-way conversation.
True.
And
I was wondering whether we shouldn't then use. Why are we using the word open letter? Why can't we say a conversation? Why can't we say a dialogue? Why can't we say a chain of letters? Why are we saying
Yeah.
open letter?
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
can you point out other sort of things that the open letter form is bringing?
well, for example, there's this very nice letter. I would say that one of the best letters I have read, which is written by Rux along the work called Time Capsule that they've done a few years ago. It's called actually a letter to Amalia Jaran. It's beautifully written. It's open. It's published and everybody can read it. But what the reading of that letter and the accessing of their future through their writing to Amalia
But
is
hang
very
on.
very exciting. Sorry.
Yeah, it is, but there the letter is going to be read by another person 50 years from now. When
Yeah.
not how is that similar to you writing a review to Mandeep's piece?
No, I'm not saying it's similar, but I'm saying I'm talking about the potential of there are some instances around, and this is what I'm saying. I'm not saying perhaps yes, I'm not reviewing a performance. I might actually end up writing something else, but I'm
Right.
actually
No, but
beginning.
I'm interested in what attracts you to the open letter form, apart from the response thing, which I also think just calling it a conversation or a dialogue will enable.
No,
So, what are the other attractive components of the form for you?
no, it's just because of the fact that it can be read by many people.
But so could a conversation if you choose to make it so between the two of you.
Like an interview, yeah.
Yeah, this is no, yeah, or if you don't like interview because again it suggests, I don't know, a certain kind of power thing, then you could say, it's just a series of conversations between Mandeep and myself. It could still be openly read by lots of people.
No, that is true. I'm not actually disagreeing with what you're saying, but it's as we are speaking, it's an experiment of whether this is a possibility that we can also, because historically, if you see that it has a very interesting, that's why I put disagreement, because it has a very critical value of disagreeing, as a of course through letters, but also sometimes through open letter, like taking a political position. Like if one were
I think someone brought up this fact that we sort of saturated with them. I think I understand where you're coming from, like what it used to be, what the open letter used to be, and what it is now. I think there's too much of a sort of it's carrying too much baggage. You know what I mean? And it's sort of
the form has become a bit old now.
Yeah.
And it's diluted the form of a letter itself in some ways, that just not the open letter, but just a letter, the format of a letter itself has a certain feeling to it, which I think an open letter being overused has completely destroyed.
Also, I would say that actually going back to someone has mentioned, it is true actually then the way in which the post economy works today, the idea of sharing everything also is a different way of publishing. That is something, of course, it is an open post, no, in a way that anybody can see it, like unless you
right.
Yes, there are limitations in terms of the controls that you have and the network that you can actually circulate in. But nevertheless, a circle of 500 people that you're in, or a 5,000 people, can actually see it. So and at the same time have completely different perspectives of how one would like to look at it, no? Whether it's too personal, too public, etc., and things like that.
No, but contrary to the common understanding, it doesn't work that way. So you don't actually have a public stage of that kind, of which there is a certain number of static audience, because things are being shuffled around at such a pace that you might only have a small accidental piece of audience, and only the people who interact with you over the long term always see your stuff. Otherwise,
which is, it's true though, but that's very true, and algorithms are a problem. But yet if you have this post up which is public, which you are trying to process disagreement, you actually can also do a collective disagreement. You can process it collectively, so you might have more of your friends also offering their perspective of where you are being overcritical, or maybe you need to think about this differently. So maybe there is a more community-oriented processing of disagreement, perhaps.
Why does it have to be in the form of a letter addressing somebody?
It's this, yeah, that's true. I mean, why does it have? Yeah, it could also just be a post of how I felt.
That's the question, is that then whether that's the point, is whether that it is a form that's useful, and if it's not a form useful also, because then why one thinks it is not.
I mean, there is a directionality to it, right? Like you're addressing some specific person or entity or something. There is a directionality. So in that sense, it's not a post, it's a letter to somebody.
Yeah.
And if you are specifically having a disagreement with that somebody, you have put it as a post, for example, and everybody is seeing it. And now because social media enables everybody to post, whoever sees it, they can offer their perspective too. I don't know, maybe it might help to process. Or it might make it worse. There'll be people inciting it further. So.
Okay. Any more comments before we go to the next question? We're actually running a little late.
No.
Okay. So the last question, which is actually why very crucial to the breaking it down when it began, is that where does the generation of a language stand in a culture that is preoccupied with nomenclatures? Where does the generation of language stand in a culture that is preoccupied with nomenclatures? So personally, for me, it comes from an extremely academic perspective, but it is, of course, true with a lot of us who work in the cultural industry. which is this condensation of a field of knowledge into particular nomenclatures, which seems to be the recurrent theme or recurrent practice.
So what do you mean by generation of language? Is that the creation of codified words? Is it lingo,
Well,
jargon?
well, in the sense like how do I produce if I'm an academic, for example, it becomes inevitable for me to use contemporary or all these nomenclatures that we operate. Yes, they're convenient. Yes, they have a particular connotation to what they mean. But in the sense of at some point is also to the quest is also to find new nomenclatures, like in terms of whether the colonial came, post-colonial came, and contemporary came. Tomorrow post-contemporary will come, in terms of the a particular kind of method that looks towards producing this condensation, which is what Rohini, we had this discussion about the Anthropocene, if you remember.
Yeah, but I think sometimes it can be generative too. I mean, it's because with words, I mean, specifically if we're talking, I mean, okay, so specifically if you look at the word Anthropocene, it's interesting only because it allows
I think
access
the big
to,
difference that you're going to have is you really need to be renovating to the demographic.
right? Like the word, sometimes it can be generative, I think, because I feel like it allows access from many different points of view. As long as it doesn't become, I suppose it hasn't yet come to that point where it's become this kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's still formative. It has not yet been really, I mean, of course it's been defined, you know what I mean? But it's not entirely set yet. It's still, we're in one of those rare places, I think, where we're seeing it become, if you like. So it's still interesting. But I'm not sure if that will stay. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
So, but is the question that is there a need for or no? What is the value of having this kind of language being generated in such a culture which is preoccupied? Are we talking about the value of it?
No, I'm not saying value of having nomenclatures. I'm talking about what other language can you actually speak in a kind of a context what is so preoccupied with nomenclatures.
I see. Okay.
So because it's also kind of an unfreezing language. So if I'm an academic, I am like obliged to speak a specific kind of language because my whatever I work with, they will say that this is not academic enough, or is
But they
not.
would say that just based on the terms that are used or the language
In terms of, I'm not saying that it's not only based on the terms that are used, but the particular kind of language that you need to use to be able to construct an argument, and also the not the compulsion, but I'd say some kind of a drive to produce a synthesis that is condensing into particular. I would say go on far and say categories and try to fit things into categories, which is a very common practice.
I mean, it's a bit worrying if there is a preoccupation with language like that, it's a bit worrying, right? Because it takes away from the content, but more about appearance.
Yeah. That is also the thing, and
also then it becomes sort of instrumentalized in a way that may not be the intent of whoever, in a sense that whoever's using the words, they can be used as to bring something into the fold of an agenda that is not something that you know what I mean? Like whoever made, if we're talking about within the arts sphere, so let's say someone has made a work and then it's been brought into a various, sort of different things just because it, that is one thing, I agree, because also then it makes things very fixed.
Yeah, and also another thing is, suppose I use a certain type of language, okay, and within my own industry, there is another set of language being used by an opposing kind of people who are also working in the field. So if I speak using these terms, I fall automatically in this camp versus in that camp, whereas I don't want to fall in any camp. So there's that labeling which arises from what words I use.
Absolutely.
And also that it makes it difficult for you to do anything else, which becomes even more problematic.
Others, Renan?
Yeah, I was thinking it depends on how one deviates also, like we were discussing yesterday or day before, that regardless of how much you deviate from your routine practice or your standard methodology of working, if you're still going to be categorized, like even if the deviant is being swallowed up by some larger category, then
Yeah.
it becomes really hard to see how really a language is evolving.
Hmm.
And I
That's
think on
the
one,
sorry. Go ahead,
I
Rena.
sorry. On one hand, I see the value of creating. I mean, I don't see. I mean, it's problematic to always be preoccupied with, having all these nomenclatures. But on the one hand, it also like manifests a level of disagreement, a level of tension that needs to be sustained as we produce new ways of thinking and new forms of articulation. So I don't, as much as it's problematic, I don't see that it's as urgent as, say, for instance, thinking through about discursive architecture and discursive sphere. I think we can accommodate all these preoccupations and all this business into this project by actually thinking through discursive architecture rather than just battling each other against the notion of which nomenclature could actually arise and be prioritized. So it's more of like the sphere and the architecture where we could actually it's not about equivalence or it's not about equal footing, but really rather having this kind of productive antagonism where there's this kind of war between linguistic devices because there will always be a production of these linguistic devices, but can this be accommodated in existing discursive spheres, for instance art and art right now, for instance with the notion of international art is not really hospitable to certain linguistic devices. So that's one thing that I think we have to talk about.
And that's why I actually agree with you, Renan, on that. And also the idea is that actually then, yes, I agree with the point of the discursive architecture that you're talking about. And I'm afraid whether that discursive architecture is being produced in terms of systematizing and it's also like, I would go far a little bit and to say institutionalizing certain forms of knowledge that comes I'm not necessarily as a deviation, but as something generative, which is being then absorbed into a particular
You know,
whole.
But when you're talking about nomenclature today, and when you were talking about jargon on the first day, what occurs to me is also the fact that the more specialized you're going to become in terms of understanding things in a particular way, the more specialized your vocabulary is going to become, and the more it's going to seem like jargon.
Yeah, and it's an unfortunate byproduct because if you're studying quantum physics, you have to talk about a boson. You can't do anything. You have to talk
Yeah,
about
and
it,
the
right? So,
specific words that you use capture the specific meaning which cannot be captured by other
yeah,
words.
correct. Yeah.
Also, Mufi, I was thinking that it seems I understood the question during the discussion that it seems to me that your sort of the question is rooted against a presupposition where jargon and nomenclature and a certain kind of canonization of language seem to be interchangeable, you know. And I can see that, of course, I mean, when you say that a certain kind of institutionalization of language comes in, it gets homogenized, meanings get scrunched down and narrowed, of course. But for nomenclature usually means naming things. And I, for one, for example, I really enjoy, and I think it's generally like the act of naming things is a productive thing. So the fact that if, I mean, you were talking about the Anthropocene, the fact that the period post, say, the 91s, I keep coming across books where somebody's called the last 10 years, say, the age of transparency, with RTI coming in and all the various different social political sort of things that have happened. Somebody else calling it the age of surveillance, somebody else calling it the age of insecurity, somebody else calling it the age of insomnia, somebody else. And instead of seeing this as a kind of a colliding, hostile ecosystem, I think the fact of like this sort of a polymorphism is a good thing because what it means is a sort of taking claim. It means
Yeah.
sort of taking claim in different kinds of interpretations, different versions of how one experiences our contemporary moment. And
Yeah, I
for me,
think
that's
the problem is that when we are not comfortable with certain vocabulary or jargon in the first, when we say that we are not comfortable with the jargon, what we actually mean is that we are not comfortable with that perspective, and we would rather like that voice to be not there in the landscape, and that is a much more that is a harsher thing to actually accept oneself, because it's easy to you know get over the fact that yes, I have my biases, but to also get over the fact that I have my biases which are very absolute in terms of I can't stand the other other position. So it might actually be about it might be reflecting on some discomfort and distress that we have.
And I think I just have to caution, I think the use of the word or the description of institutionalization of knowledge, for instance, or this
Mm-hmm.
production, because on one hand, yes, it always gets institutionalized, but the process of institutionalization of these, the way we see and relate to institutions as a, like a Western civil manifestation,
Mm-hmm.
takes time. So I mean, so there's this process of that's why I'm more interested into this notion of discursive architecture, because when the process of forming takes time for institutions, that's the way I think other forms of discursivity and other forms of linguistic devices could actually enter into this kind of process, because it takes time. I mean, it doesn't happen like in 10 years or like, I mean, so I don't think we have to think through this idea that institutionalization doesn't really happen like quickly. It happens with
No,
this
actually,
kind of,
the intention is not for the institutionalized happen too quickly, or it is to say, I think what few points actually is very. I really like the idea of the discursive architecture that you're proposing, Renan, because I think somewhere we are actually on the same page. What we are discussing was on the same page, and also I like the point that Shaunak raised about the naming of the things and the value of naming something, because that gives you a kind of a perspective. Then what I'm trying to so when I actually was thinking about it, and also in terms of there are two kinds of things. Of course, there is a certain kind of naming as a practice which we involve in as practitioners almost every day in various ways, in various formats, and in various platforms. The second is the practice where uh, 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 how can I put it? It's like the forced culmination of completely different kinds of practices into one whole. Like it's like the way the challenge that somebody has faces about the framing of the contemporary, for instance, and which some people have been doing and some people have given up. So I'm not saying that we have to abandon or not engage, because I think we are engaging with these questions, but also it either in the kind of the discursive architecture that you are proposing, whether we have to be cautioned or careful in terms of what the knowledge what forms of knowledge are we producing for the future, even for ourselves, if not for the future, or for someone else.
no, yeah, I mean, I get that, but my problem with the invocation of institution is that it remains to be one of those lone standing or one of those concrete, we always refer back to this notion of referencing the institution as a form of a monolithic, you know what I mean? Like as a, something like as a referencing point in terms of producing, or in terms
Hmm.
of how we constitute and sort of move around. So I
Hmm.
mean, so for me, it's important to put it in a larger discourse of things. For instance, thinking about infrastructures, for instance,
Hmm.
infrastructures of knowledge that would
Hmm.
involve institutions coming from, say, for instance, the global south. I mean, my point is like, for
Yeah,
instance, in Southeast Asia, you have different ways
yeah.
of you have a totally different notions of institutions that begin with the notion of sick institutions rather than, a welfare state institution. So that kind of expanding the notion of institutionalization as something that, that's not just, anyway, yeah.
So that hints to me about the elitism and things like accessibility hierarchies. Like if you're using this, if you're not using jargon, or if you're not able to produce jargon, then you're not worth hearing. You're too simplistic or something. So
I'm not so sure about that, because like somebody else was mentioning that jargon, I think Prayas was saying that the words that are used that we like to generalize as jargon is sometimes very specific to that particular
I
field or
understand that.
activity.
No,
So
I understand that,
I
but the
think
thing is,
the resistance to jargon comes from the inability to access that piece of information. And that
precisely. So the thing is, if I'm not within those structures because I've not been given entry, because I don't speak in a particular way, I already am kept out of that knowledge structure, even though I'm able to produce something which may have been of, addition to it.
right. So are you saying that that's the nomenclature that's being generated, falsely generated?
Because Renan just talked about the global south, right? Like, I mean, there are these hierarchies of what
Yeah.
becomes into
Exactly.
vogue,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but the point is that yes, that the distinctions of hierarchies are very important, but and also the idea of then how discursivity as such, how discursive architecture that Renan was interestingly pointing to reorients itself. And it's not to say that what Shronak's talked about, the question of the naming is important, but it's also the consciousness of how this practice of naming is unfolding is also important. How one is actually generating a particular kind of meaning to these everyday, otherwise casually used, like if I can say nomenclatures that are there. So my point is then to, yeah, it's not definitely to say that the question of the naming is not important, but the question of whether we are conscious to this process of making knowledge is what I was actually trying to head at.
Conscious of the process and also conscious of other people's processes. Are we able to accommodate that?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay. Thought I dropped off.
Do we have time? Can I just say a small thing?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so no, I'm getting a little confused and a bit uncomfortable with again this interchangeability between nomenclature and the world of jargon, etc. Nomenclature means the act of naming, right? I can understand that there is a durational experience through which over time nomenclature leads to jargonization, etc. Now the thing is that the
Yeah.
frenzy of theory or the main drive of theory is always towards naming experiences, sensations, etc., right, or processes. The point
Certainly.
of theoretical thought, more often than not, is to be able to pin down in language historical processes, social conditions, experiences, how like the raw material of everyday life. So
No, but the thing is, who's doing the naming and who gets to,
That's the
whose
question.
naming gets the bigger priority, that sort of thing.
yeah, no, I understand
And
that.
why do they get it? Yeah.
But that's an important, okay, I agree in the distinction between the nomenclature and the jargon. It's also about the question of who is naming and whose naming is taken as naming. That's the important question. And it's also linking to what Anand was talking about, the diversity of like where you are actually talking from and what infrastructure, for example, could mean somewhere to the west, to the global south. It's a completely different method of approach.
Yeah,
Doesn't the naming always follow the process of knowledge production or the experience? The naming is always coming later.
Yeah.
I see it as something that follows the what Renan was calling the discursive architecture.
But you were expanding something, Shona? Do you want to say before we wind up? We have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, see, for me, the more interesting part of now, obviously, of course, this is an old question that who is doing the naming, and of course, this has to do with questions of power, of access, of elitism, etc. But that's, I mean, that's all of us will have certain things to say about that, and that's fairly. I mean, we know like there are structures in place. I was very interested when you said, Mopi, that, for example, the Anthropocene, for example, like the sort of almost convulsive tendency to want to name, to want to pin
Yeah,
words to
yeah.
and there within that there is a kind of conceptual and theoretical overproduction and overdetermination which I'm quite interested in. And I thought the question was geared towards whether today there is a definitive push towards the for example, I was reading that today all of millennials in general read much more than anybody of that age denomination has in the past, even though they're not reading books, right? So the text, like written word as an interface, has really staggeringly grown. So when you were pointing towards the desire to name, the desire to put bring experience into the fold of language, I thought that's, I think, sort of like, to me it sounds like a more interesting thing to, and a more uncharted.
Yeah, it's also exactly the Anthropocene example is that's what we are actually arriving at, because the difficulty of actually having that emphasis to name and also over attribute, as you said. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I said overproduce and overdetermine.
Overdetermine, yeah. Something that to overdetermine, and which is something that you face with a lot of these things that emerge, and that's also the continuous challenge of whether you're like, at the end you're confused what actually it means, no? Since it seemed to be meaning so many things simultaneously, and whether that is something that is productive to. Sorry, go ahead.
Just one last note about the naming. I think we should just de-escalate this process of naming as something that is just, you know, a access point. So for instance, in the case of the Anthropocene, for instance, when it gets talked about in the context of, say, Southeast Asia or South Asia, for instance, this allows actually a possibility to actually revive, or it's a point of this juncture. It allows to apprehend this juncture and to actually appoint and assert new conjunctures that are not necessarily about the Anthropocene, or that might be actually connected to the Anthropocene. So this for me, with all its problematics, are just merely, you know, like points of continuity, or even like points of entry. So I mean, we have to de-escalate this process of like.
No, that's actually good, because I think it make us end in a rather positive note. It's also the question of where you are asking the question from and where actually you're speaking, and it's also good in terms of thinking about the construction of what Renan was saying about the discursive architecture, and also rethinking about what Shaunak was saying about in terms of the process of naming and how it is different from a jargon. Okay, I think we are done. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed, and so hopefully in another forum on another topic very soon. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay,
Sounds
bye.
great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.